Now we will look at the provisions in Convention on Biological Diversity Act. So, as we have discussed, the Convention on Biological Diversity Act is the first convention to recognize access and benefit sharing. I also recognize that you should and also it has other mandates like conservation of biological diversity and sustainable use of biological diversity, which we will be discussing in another module. But the major thing that is related to this particular convention is the adoption of the concept of access and benefit sharing. Now, let us look at the national framework that is there in India. So, India in 2002 has enacted Biological Diversity Act. So, what is Biological Diversity Act? Biological Diversity Act is simply our putting into the legal terms or obligations under the Convention on Biological Diversity. So, this convention, it is also important to know that under the Convention on Biological Diversity, the states have been given the sovereign rights to determine the terms of access. So, we were saying that now whoever who wants to collect or use a biological resources of a particular country, if I am a person belonging to another country, if I want to use a biological resource that is in another country, I cannot come and just pick it up and go and use it for different purposes. We have said that there are regulations. Those regulations are called access regulations, and with the access regulations attached is the regulations relating to benefit sharing. So, this Biological Diversity Act tackles or it describes what are these regulations that are prevailing in India, because the Convention on Biological Diversity gives you the liberty, gives the states the liberty to decide how their access should be and what the various means of benefit sharing would be. So, drawing from the convention, the Indian Parliament has enacted a particular legislation called Biological Diversity Act, and it has constituted 3 main statutory bodies under it. That is National Biodiversity Authority, which has jurisdiction all over India, and then you have the state biodiversity boards, which has jurisdiction over a particular state, and then you have the biological management committees, which has jurisdiction over the territorial limits of a panchayat. So, it is like the local body which associated with the governance of biodiversity. So, the Biological Diversity Act has the mandate of the access and of dealing with all the provisions relating to access and benefit sharing. And when you also look at the concept of access and benefit sharing, we have been saying that yes, you need there is access regulation, there is benefit sharing regulation. So, what is this access regulation all about? It's about how you give access to a particular biological resources. Like it says that the one of the important elements of this particular concept is free informed consent. Free informed consent means when I am giving the consent to someone else to come and collect the biological resources from my territory, then it should be free, and also I should be informed about all the all the information that are necessary to give a decision whether as to give you the access to that particular resources or not. So, when you talk about the principle of prior informed consent, it includes when the approval or whom to approach when you want an approval, and it involves who is a competent authority to give approval. It also includes what is the procedure for giving consent, and the most important thing is the consent should be given prior to the access, and it should be the authority should be informed about the relevant factors that will enable it to give consent or not. So, these are some of the principles or like ingredients of prior informed consent. Now, let's say like for instance, like because since the convention on this concept of access and benefit sharing had its genesis from the convention on biological diversity, which is like an international convention where states play a main role in the entire thing. We have this particular concept like a foreigner or like a person who is not from a particular country coming and accessing your biological resources, and you engaging with that particular person and giving the giving the access or not giving the access. So, when you have a particular for instance, if a company from a foreign from say England is coming here and the company wants to use a particular biological resource, for instance say neem, for a particular purposes, say that is to make an insecticide, because in the traditional knowledge there is enough literature saying that neem is effective as an insecticide or has other properties. So, a company from another country A is coming to country B and seeking the permission of country B to use a particular biological resource for a particular purposes. So, what are the things that will involve in this? One, the country A should know whom to approach to seek the permission, so, which is the competent authorities who has a power to give or competent authorities to approach for this access regulation, and they should also know the competent authorities who has the power to give approval. They should also know whether there are other regulations that are associated with the entire access procedure, and also these are the information, and also they should know how long will I take to access or get permission to access biological resources from a particular country, so that the company can make an informed decision whether to apply in this country for accessing a particular biological resource or not. Wherein the party in the provider country, that is country B or say India is giving a company from England this biological resource called neem, and it is used for certain purposes. But what does India want to know about this? India wants to know who are you and for what purpose are you asking this particular biological resource for? Is it for research or is it to make a insecticide, like a economically a marketable product out of it? And which stage is it? Because maybe maybe the company will want to do a research first and then see the possibilities of coming out with a product and maybe then market the product. Then all this information regarding this use of this particular access or the purpose of this particular access should also be given. So, these are certain elements that are there while giving you a prior informed consent. So, these will also signify will decide whether country wants, like India wants to give a company in England this particular right to access your biological resources. And then you have something called mutually agreed terms. Mutually agreed terms is when I am saying, okay, look, you can access the biological resource from me, but I do not think it is going to involve a lot of value addition that India cannot do, or if you train us we can do, or if you give us certain money for, or if you set up a unit of this particular unit in this particular area so that we can do all the processing, then that will generate income for a lot, for income and employment for some people. It will be a skill or technology, exchange of technological and information regarding the technology with the country. So these are the things that we would want to negotiate with the country regarding the access. So we will say yes, we can give the access if you give this much money. Maybe if you are going to make a product out of it and say an insecticide or something, then you will give this much share of your profit to us. Or if you set up a processing unit in India, so that it will give employment to a lot of people, or it will give value addition or skill sharing to a lot of people in India, or it will help Indians to kind of like do this particular processing of neem, conversion of neem into an insecticide by themselves, then that can be incorporated in the agreement that will form the basis of your access permission. So all these things that we have mentioned is like share from the profit, or setting up a new industrial unit in the country which is providing the biological resources will be benefits, and sharing of benefits, these will be called sharing of benefits. So this is the mutually agreed term. So when you talk about that, how has India incorporated all these things in its Biological Diversity Act, in its legislation? That's a Biological Diversity Act. So say for example, a foreigner is coming to India, a foreign company, this company based in England is coming to India and accessing a product and accessing the biological resources, that is a neem, and also it is also accessing the traditional knowledge associated with it, because India has a traditional knowledge. It is recorded that neem is useful for this particular purposes, and based on that knowledge they are developing a product. That's so if this company wants to do that project, then it has to come to the authority called National Biodiversity Authority, because under section 3 of the Biological Diversity Act, it says that whenever a foreigner, it's called section 3(2) persons, whenever a foreigner or a foreign company which is incorporated outside India, or an Indian company with foreign shareholding, or a non-resident Indian want to access the biological, want to obtain a biological resources occurring in India or the knowledge associated with it, then it has to get the prior permission from the National Biodiversity Authority. So that is the first regulation that's there in the Biological Diversity Act, which is relating to access. So the appropriate forum or the competent authority to approach is the National Biodiversity Authority for people who are for section 3(2) people. Section 3(2) people, there are 4 kinds of section 3(2) people. One is a foreigner, that is a person who is not a citizen of India. Another person is a non-resident Indian who is defined in section 2 subsection 30 of the Income Tax Act, or a body corporate or organization incorporated outside India, that is a foreign company or a organization, or an Indian company or a body corporation incorporated in India but having non-Indian participation in its shareholding or management. So these 4 categories of persons will be called as a section 3(2) persons, and if they want to access your biological resources, that is if they want to obtain the biological resources from which are occurring in India or knowledge associated with it, then they have to approach the National Biodiversity Authority. But and the Act also stipulates that you need to approach the National Biodiversity Authority when you are undertaking 3 kinds of biodiversity related activities. So one is research. Research is basically how you do research is like a systematic study of a particular thing. You can also have a if also the other two kinds of biodiversity activity is commercial utilization, the other one is biosurvey and bioutilization. All these activities are defined in the Biological Diversity Act. So, the research is when you want to conduct a study on a biological bioresources.